Picture this. You're in the kitchen, maybe making dinner, and you reach for it, that familiar roll of aluminum foil.
A kitchen workhorse.
Exactly. Use it for everything, right? Wrapping leftovers, lining pans, and it's just always there.
So useful.
But have you ever stopped to think, like, what's really going on when that foil touches your food? Could it be doing more than just, keeping things fresh?
It's a great question, and it's actually what we're diving into today. We're looking at aluminum foil based on a bunch of sources you sent over.
Right. We've got articles talking about alternatives, some info from the European Aluminum Foil Association, advice on reducing aluminum exposure, even warnings about using foil with certain foods.
And a pretty detailed scientific study, too, looking specifically at the risks when you cook with foil.
So our mission today is basically to sift through all this, figure out what's fact, what's maybe a bit hyped up, and give you the clear picture.
Yeah, we want to pull out the key stuff, those aha moments, without getting bogged down in super technical jargon. We'll unpack the science and the practical advice.
Okay, let's do it. So first off, we can all agree aluminum foil is incredibly versatile. That's kind of its whole appeal, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. One of the articles, the one about alternatives, really highlights that. Packaging, cooking, storing, it's everywhere.
Which I guess makes these questions about it even more important.
Exactly. If we use it so much, we should probably understand it better.
So why are people looking for alternatives? What are the main concerns popping up in these sources?
Well, they generally fall into two main buckets, you could say. First, there's the environmental side.
Oh, okay.
Getting aluminum, the raw material, takes a lot of energy. It's mined, processed, it's quite intensive.
And recycling. I know aluminum can be recycled.
It can, and it often is, especially cans.
Yeah.
But foil is trickier. Sometimes it's dirty with food. Sometimes people just don't realize it can be recycled. So the rates aren't perfect. In the U.S., maybe around 35% for packaging back in 2018. Europe does a bit better, maybe 50%.
So a fair amount still ends up in landfill, especially since it's often single use.
Precisely. That makes exploring reusable or more easily recycled alternatives pretty relevant from a sustainability angle.
Makes sense. Okay, so that's the environmental part. What's the second big area of concern?
That would be the health aspect. Specifically, this idea that aluminum might, leach or migrate from the foil into the food.
Right. I've definitely heard people worry about that. Is there actual science behind it?
There is. And this is where some of those studies you sent come in, especially that one from the International Journal of Electrochemical Science.
Yeah, that one sounded serious. Electrochemical science. What does that actually mean in this context?
It basically just means they were looking at the chemical reactions happening right where the foil meets the food, particularly when things like electricity, or in this case, ions are involved. They set up experiments, cooking things like minced meat with common ingredients.
Like what kind of ingredients?
Oh, things like tomato juice, vinegar, citric acid, acidic stuff, and also salt, spices, things we typically cook with.
And what did they find? Did the aluminum actually move into the food?
Yes, significantly. The study, this was back in 2012, found that cooking in foil definitely increased the aluminum content in the food.
Okay, increased? Are we talking tiny, negligible amounts or?
Well, it really depended on the conditions. Leaching was much higher when the food was acidic. Think tomato sauce, lemon juice, that sort of thing.
Right.
Adding spices pushed it even higher. Salt also increased it.
Interesting. So acid and salt are key players. What about heat?
Heat definitely mattered. They found grilling fish in foil led to more aluminum getting into the fish compared to baking it. Probably because grilling often involves higher temperatures.
Okay. Higher heat, more leaching.
And also longer cooking time. The longer the food sat in the foil while cooking, the more aluminum transferred. They even cited an older study, I think from 2001, that saw aluminum levels in fish jump by, anywhere from double up to 68 times.
68 times. Wow. Okay, that's a lot.
It certainly makes you pause, doesn't it? And it wasn't just fish. They looked at ground meat cooked with acidic things and spices, too. In some of those tests, the aluminum levels actually went above the acceptable daily intake limits set by the World Health Organization.
Really? So this leaching isn't always just a tiny trace amount, then?
Apparently not, especially under certain conditions. The study basically concluded that cooking with foil, particularly with acidic or salty ingredients, can add significant amounts of aluminum to our diet. They even looked at veggies cooked in aluminum pots and found leaching there too, especially with tomatoes.
So the pot itself can contribute too, not just foil.
It seems so. The researchers suggested that aluminum from cookware, including foil, could potentially add large doses to our diet, possibly exceeding those weekly safety limits set by health organizations like the FDA and WHO.
Okay, that sounds pretty concerning. But wait, we also had that perspective from the European Aluminium Foil Association. What's their take? They make the stuff, right?
They do, and they argue that, generally speaking, foil is safe for food contact. They mention a food chemist, Dr. Ulrich Nering, who says it's safe for packaging if you follow certain rules.
Rules like what?
The big ones are: avoid using it for storing or cooking really acidic or very salty foods, especially barbecuing with those kinds of marinades, for example.
So they acknowledge the leaching can happen with acid and salt.
Yes, they explain that it's the acid or salt that can kind of loosen the aluminum ions from the foil, allowing them to move into the food. But they emphasize its benefits too.
Like what?
They call it an absolute barrier. It protects food from light, oxygen, moisture, germs, all that stuff, which helps food last longer and reduces food waste.
That's a fair point. Food waste is a huge environmental issue, too.
Absolutely. It's a balancing act.
So where do major food safety organizations land on this? Is foil generally considered safe or not?
Broadly speaking, yes. Most major food safety bodies consider aluminum foil safe for typical use. They often point out that our bodies are actually pretty good at getting rid of the aluminum we ingest.
How?
Healthy kidneys eliminate almost all of it, like 99.9%, and there are established safe weekly intake limits. The European Food Safety Authority set one, and the joint WHO-FAO committee actually raised it slightly a few years back, suggesting the risk might be lower than previously thought for the general population.
So for a typical adult, what's that limit, roughly?
For someone around 70 kilos or 154 pounds, the safe range is about 70 to 140 milligrams per week.
Okay. But how does that square with the study showing some cooked foods exceeded daily limits?
That's the tricky part, isn't it? It seems the official stance is more about average exposure and typical use, assuming healthy individuals. Those studies highlight potential peak exposures under specific cooking conditions, especially with acidic or salty foods at high heat.
Got it. So the official view is generally safe, but the science shows potential for higher intake in specific situations.
That seems to be a fair summary.
Okay, so if you do want to use foil but want to be cautious, what's the practical advice based on all this? How can you minimize that potential leaching?
The advice is actually quite consistent across the sources. Number one, try to avoid using foil for cooking or even storing highly acidic or heavily salted foods.
So less foil for tomato sauce, lemon marinades, pickles.
Exactly. Number two, avoid using it for really high heat cooking. Think temps above, say, 430 Fahrenheit or 220 Celsius. Maybe use something else for intense grilling or broiling, especially with those acidic or salty components.
What about just wrapping cold sandwiches or leftovers?
Generally, that's considered much lower risk. The reaction is much less likely to happen without the heat and with less direct, prolonged contact, especially if the food isn't super acidic or salty.
Okay, that's helpful. Avoid acid, avoid salt, avoid very high heat for cooking in the foil.
Pretty much.
Now, there was a mention in one article about a marketing angle. What was that about?
Yeah, that was interesting. The suggestion was that sometimes companies selling alternative products might perhaps overemphasize the dangers of aluminum to make their own products look better.
Playing up the fear factor a bit.
Potentially. The point was that while leaching is real under certain conditions, the amounts might be small in many typical uses, and regulatory bodies do generally consider foil safe, much like they consider alternatives safe under their intended use conditions.
Right, it's always good to consider who's telling you something and why. A bit of critical thinking is needed.
Always.
Okay, so let's talk solutions. If you want to cut back on foil, what are the good alternatives out there?
Lots of great options, thankfully. For storing food, you've got reusable silicone containers or bags, super versatile, easy to wash.
Yeah, those are popular.
Glass containers are fantastic too. They don't react with food at all. Good for storing, good for reheating. A bit heavier maybe and breakable, but really inert.
What about wraps?
You've got things like reusable cloth wraps, often made of cotton or muslin. Good for sandwiches, covering bowls. Not waterproof usually.
Oh.
Then there are beeswax wraps.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those.
They're reusable, breathable, moldable with the heat of your hands. Good for cheese, covering bowls, wrapping half an avocado, stuff like that.
Okay, that covers storage. What about for cooking and baking? Replacing foil when you need heat resistance.
For baking sheets, silicone baking mats are a game changer. Reusable, non-stick, easy cleanup. Just check their temperature limits.
Right. Or parchment paper.
Parchment paper is brilliant. Non-stick, good for baking, roasting, even steaming things on papillote. Some kinds are compostable. Chef Dennis Lilly mentioned in one article really recommended parchment for baking and roasting.
Okay. And for grilling, foil is so common there.
True, but you can use grill baskets great for veggies or fish so they don't fall apart or stick. Stainless steel grill mats are another option, or even things like butcher paper for smoking meats that lets the meat breathe.
Butcher paper, interesting.
Yeah, it holds up to heat surprisingly well for certain applications. And don't forget simple things like using lids on pans or casserole dishes instead of foil, or using Dutch ovens for covered cooking. Oven-safe glass containers work for baking and reheating too.
So plenty of ways to tackle different kitchen tasks without automatically reaching for the foil.
Definitely. There's usually an alternative available, often a reusable one.
All right, let's try and wrap this up then. If you had to distill it all down, what are the main things we should take away about aluminum foil?
Okay, I'd say, 1, it's incredibly useful, no doubt. 2, there are valid environmental questions about its production and the fact that not all of it gets recycled. 3, yes, aluminum can leach into food, especially with heat, acid, and salt.
But 4, our bodies handle small amounts well, and major health bodies generally consider it safe for typical use.
Right. But being mindful, especially avoiding those high-risk combinations, acid, salt, high heat, seems prudent based on the science. And 5, there are tons of effective alternatives for pretty much every use case.
So it's about being informed, not necessarily scared.
Exactly. Making conscious choices based on the information.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over. Thinking about everything we've discussed today, what's maybe one small, doable change you could try in your kitchen regarding foil or its alternatives? Maybe swapping it out for one specific task just to see, not out of fear, but just being a bit more mindful about the materials we use every day.
And of course, if this has sparked your curiosity and you want to dig even deeper into those studies or explore more sustainable kitchen practices, let us know. We always enjoy peeling back another layer.